Good evening and welcome to this Hereford Diocese Inclusive Church Forum event, which is To Ability and Beyond, a Q&A with Garry Ward, who's our new Diocesan Disability Advisor. We're really excited to be bringing this to you. And first of all, I'll just let Garry introduce himself. So could you tell us a bit about yourself and your experiences of disability and the church?
Good evening. It's good to be here and to talk about disability in the church and how accessibility and all the other bits and pieces that come into that work within the church or don't work within the church, which is probably more important. My experience of disability is up until about 10 years ago, I was fine. I was walking, talking, doing all the things that you normally do. And then I was diagnosed after I had a problem with my knee with psoriatic arthritis, which is a rheumatoid arthritis related to psoriasis, which meant that I got an awful lot of pain and found it quite difficult to walk. And then, bless the Lord, about 3 years ago I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. So that's added to the problems of balance and jittering and slowness and freezing and all the things that go with Parkinson's disease. So that means that with both of those together, most of the time if I'm walking short distances, I use a stick or crutches on a really bad day. And then if I have to go any distance further than a few yards, I have to use a wheelchair, which I've been using now for about 3 or 4 years. And if I'm out and about in the village, I use a mobility scooter, and in church it's quite okay, because on the flat surfaces I'm not too bad, and I can still manage to stand and do services as best I can, sitting where I need to and adjusting things as I need to. It's easier for me to adjust things because I'm the vicar, so it makes life a bit easier. But and then I sort of started thinking about accessibility, obviously, and other things purely about myself. And it really came home to me when I went to Canterbury Cathedral. And you can get to a lot of Canterbury Cathedral. There's a lift and there's all sorts of flat areas and ramps, which is really good. But the very top of Canterbury Cathedral, the high altar, you cannot get to. And I thought, But I also sort of saw this as, inevitable in buildings such as that were built all those years ago. So that brought it home to me. And then the disability advisor retired here, and Bishop Richard asked me, with all my experience and everything that had happened to me personally, would I consider being the disability advisor for the diocese, which I accepted with some trepidation, because having all these things happen to you personally is one thing, but advising for other people and other problems is another. So that's where we are at the moment. So I've been in post since March, and we've been in lockdown since March, so it's been quite interesting.
Which I guess leads us on to one of our questions, which is what has been, or what do you think will be, the most difficult thing about being the diocese's disability advisor?
Well, the big problem has been COVID-19, which is stopping me from connecting and getting around to people. Because I think the most important thing in a role like this is actually connecting with other people and hearing their experiences, and then going into churches where you're thinking about accessibility and looking what there is there, which obviously we haven't been able to do because all churches have been shut and social distancing's meant that we haven't been able to get together. But what that has meant is I've managed to sort of study equality law and look at that, which has sort of blown my mind completely, and to do a lot of reading around things. But it's not the same as getting out there, and that's the frustrating part. I want to get out there, meet people, see how things are done, and get really into it that way. So it's been a bit frustrating at the moment.
Yeah, I can imagine. So speaking of COVID-19, obviously how this pandemic has changed a lot of how we do church and how we interact with other people, and for some disabled people that's made it easier to access church because it's at home, and obviously for others it's made it harder, as with everyone. Do you think that the coronavirus pandemic will have a lasting impact on how the church interacts with disabled people, or is this just going to pass by and we'll forget about the things we've learnt here? Have we learnt anything, I suppose, is also a question.
I think a lot of people have been on a steep learning curve with regards to this sort of thing, doing things on video, online, streaming services, streaming talks, streaming Bible study groups. And I hope people have learnt an awful lot of this, because what I hope would happen is, when this is all over, that there is some kind of online presence from the churches that remains. I'm not saying we do every service. We need to go back to being the people of God in a place as a corporate church. But at the same time, I've heard people saying that, it's the first time they've truly accessed church for a long time by being able to go online, because they haven't been able to get out, or if they're housebound or anything like that. So it has been a really positive thing in one way, and I hope that we keep that going. I hope that we have a bigger online presence from a lot more churches and a lot more people, giving a whole wide range and breadth and depth of different worship and prayer and opportunities to study and to be together that people can access, which they feel comfortable with. It also allows people to be, not to be stuck in one village with one church that isn't quite their thing. They can go wider. The beauty of the Church of England is it's a big, wide breadth and depth of church, but if you can't get there, it might as well not happen. So I think that is a good thing, and I hope that carries on, and I hope we can get a good balance between the two.
That's really interesting, thanks. So this is potentially quite a big question, maybe not. If you could get everyone in the church to change one thing about how they interact with or talk about or relate to disabled people, what would it be? Communication.
It'd be it's communication and not presuming to know. It's all about actually sitting down and having a conversation with people that have any kind of issues, right through from special educational needs, autism, to accessibility problems with wheelchairs, sight problems, hearing problems. But it's actually sitting down and being with people and saying, look, what do you need? How can we help? Instead of thinking, oh, that person is disabled in that way, therefore we must stick a ramp in there, or we must do this here. And the other thing is spending a lot of money on stuff that nobody's ever going to use. It's all about balance and sense, but that starts with good communication and not presuming to know what people need. If there was one thing in a church that I think every church should have, because I think it affects so many people, is a loop system. Yes. I think a loop system is a working loop system, may I add, because
that the vicar actually uses.
Yes, true. That all people use it. That it's a proper loop system, and everybody uses the microphones, and they don't shy away from it. And we test it regularly that it's working, because that is a problem that affects so many people in our churches, particularly with. Let's not deny it. Our churches are an ageing congregation. And a lot of people have hearing aids and have hearing difficulties. So I think that would be the one thing I'd say go for first.
Yeah. Which connects to another question we had. Making alterations to church buildings can be costly and can take quite a lot of time. We all know, faculty applications are quite a lot of a headache sometimes. I've never made one. I don't know why I'm claiming this. I've heard things. So are there, in the context of, we have quite a lot, especially in this diocese, we have a lot of small rural churches that don't necessarily have a lot of money to make big alterations. Other than a hearing loop, are there any small measures or cheaper measures that people could take quite quickly, or things that could be used as an interim, that sort of on the way to making a church building more accessible? Are there sort of smaller steps for a bit, if that makes sense?
Yeah, again, it's all about conversation. It's about intention. It's about wanting to do it. That's the thing. A lot of people say they want to do it, but actually, when it gets down to the crux of it, when they look at the work involved, it's a bit like, oh, we don't really want to do this. But it's often about how small things can be changed. It's not always about drastic alteration to buildings and huge projects that cost money that people haven't got. Simple fixes like movable ramps, ramps that are fit for purpose, but they are movable, and they're an interim fix, and they're at least getting a solution, something in place until you get a better solution in place when you do a reordering of the church at a later date or something. But again, it's intention to do that. But it's also things like if you have communion and you do it at the high altar, and your high altar's up a load of steps, why don't you consider moving the altar or having another table down at nave level so people can access things like that? The other issue is toilets. I think the one thing that's a big issue is that if places are going to consider having toilets, and a lot of churches in this diocese don't have toilets. I know.
As someone who lives far away from churches, you have to take services out. It's really stressful.
Yeah, you do have to sort of work out your route and where the toilets are sometimes, yes. But if you're going to do things like put toilets in, make it an accessible toilet, yes. That's the first thing I would say. Make it spacious, not just spacious for people with wheelchairs, but you know, people with autism need bigger areas, and they need changing areas and bigger spaces to do things in. And especially, you know, I mean, a lot of places now, they do these big, wide open space toilets for autistic people and children, because confined spaces do not work for them. It's part of their sensory problem. So have a good size, make sure you've got a good size space for this toilet to put in a good accessible toilet. But also, don't then put an accessible toilet 2 steps down. It's things, it's just literally doing things like common sense. And it's don't have an accessible toilet and store the chairs in there. You know, because it's a nice big space, and you can, you know, everybody else can still get to have a pee, but you can't get in there with a wheelchair, or, you know, when you need the space. With the new role that I've taken on, part of it is to work with the Diocesan Advisory Committee. So when faculties come in for changes in the church, then I will go out as part of the visiting team and advise. And what I intend to do is not say, oh, we need a massive ramp there, a massive ramp there, is actually sympathetically think about, you know, cost, what can be done, and what can be done in the interim. You know, how can you make small changes to make places more accessible? It's again, another simple example is if you've got a wheelchair user. The problem is with wheelchair users, they either get stuck at the back and feel like a second-class citizen because they're on the back on their own, or with the carer sat next to them on a chair, or they're stuck right down the front where they suddenly become the focus of attention, which draws attention to their disability rather to them as a member of the congregation, as a member of the church. So it's finding a place where you can put a wheelchair. I mean, a lot of places have pews that, you know, you can move a little bit. I mean, we've got pews that you can slide. They're not bolted to the floor. So what's to stop you moving one slightly across one wheelchair space, put the wheelchair on the end, and then everybody sit next to as normal? And and if you've got chairs, obviously take a couple of chairs out and put a wheelchair in. It's little fixes like that make... The law says you have to make a reasonable effort. So, you know, if something's going to cost you, you know, £50,000 and you haven't got the money, then that can't be seen as a reasonable effort. But if you're making ways for people to be a part of that church, that means that you adapt the way you do it, like a nave altar and moving slightly pews to fit wheelchairs, etc., then you are making reasonable adjustments, and that would be fine. It also shows the people that you're willing to actually do something, even if you can't do something major, and that they are appreciated and accepted.
So moving slightly away from physical spaces into, I guess, attitudes.
Yes.
Have you seen any change in the church's attitude towards or inclusion of disabled people since you've been in the church? I don't know how long that's been. Is it?
Oh, long time.
Right. Lot of experience.
No, hang on a minute. Yeah, there are many positive changes have occurred, particularly around accessibility loop systems and the need to change physical things. Although there are still pockets of resistance to this, particularly when it comes to things like heritage buildings. People get very, you know, precious about their heritage buildings, and rightly so. You know, they are valuable assets and need to be looked after. But it's something that we need to sort of think about, and you can do a lot of things sympathetically without ruining the heritage of your business, your building, which I think a lot of people are scared about. But the big problem is there have not been widespread changes when it comes to mental health or autistic spectrum or learning disabilities. There are some pockets of really good work in individual places, but it's not a widespread thing even now. Unfortunately, it's a vicious circle. Churches and other institutions see themselves not affected by these issues as no one comes, and particularly in smaller communities. But the problem is nobody comes because they haven't got, the faith in going there, because nothing's been done to help them or support them. So nobody comes. Yes, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, but nobody comes because they don't feel they can come. So that's something that I think we really need to look at, is the more hidden disabilities. And those are the issues that the church really needs to tackle more widespread now, as well as the ongoing issues with accessibility. Although I think accessibility is becoming a lot better now. It is those sort of hidden disabilities we need to look at.
Yeah. So on that note, what would you say to a parent who wants to go to church but feels that they can't because of, say, their child's special needs or disability?
Again, it's about good communication. It's about not presuming to think what is right for the person, because yourself when you're looking at a spectrum of something, particularly special educational needs or autism, not everybody has the same needs. So you can't put in a block set of needs. So you can't put in a sensory play area for everybody, because that's not going to cover everybody's needs. And it will also probably be an awful lot of money and will not be used greatly. So what you need to do is speak to carers, parents, friends and other members of the family, as long as you've got permission to do that. And then do things like maybe have a reserved pew to keep continuity going, because with things like special educational needs and autism, routine and being the same is very important. So if they've got to change seat every week, it can be a difficult thing. So it's small things like that make the disability. You've got to remember things like no great overcrowding, or everybody sort of swamping that person during the piece or in the welcome or in the coffee after. Again, it's small. So it's educating the people in your church about what is happening and actually make this happen. But it's also about communication to find out exactly what you need to do for the people that are coming to your church. And it's also, with education as well, it's things like accept that there may be noise. Especially if you've got somebody with a need, and part of their need is they shout out or they make a lot of noise, or and it's all about education. And once people get it into their mindset, it's not usually a problem. But it's just that people don't know. It's not ignorance. It's just that they've never come across it before. And it's education and communication.
Nice. So this is sort of speaking out of ignorance here, because I've only really experienced one parish around here where we don't do this. But are schools for special educational needs and disability learning schools included in the church's outreach for stuff like Open the Book and carol services and things like that, as far as you know? And can they be? Like, how do we do that? How do we equip people? Because obviously our Open the Book teams are usually just normal people in the congregation. How can we equip people to go in and work in sort of a different space to maybe the schools they're used to? Or
I'm not, because I'm still fairly new in this, I'm not 100% sure what is in this diocese, because it's never... I must admit, special educational needs, autism spectrum is not my speciality, if you like, and that's something I've really got to educate myself about and learn about as I go on in this role. So I'm only speaking from a sort of a very sort of superficial look at this at the moment, and I'll admit that. But I think if there is a school or an educational outreach or a home for people like that, I think in most places the church will probably be involved. The big issue about churches being involved in places such as particularly schools, schools for people with learning disabilities, is, are the head teacher and the staff receptive to you being a part of that? That is the first thing you've got to establish a rapport with the staff and the head and the ancillary staff that work there. That's probably the biggest thing that needs to be done. It is a very fulfilling ministry, but it does need a different approach. And again, it's about education. So if you've got an open the book team that are going into your schools, and then they're asked to go into a school with special educational needs, or a centre that is geared up for autism, say, or something like that, then what they need to do is they need to be educated in how to do that, because obviously things have got to be different. Our open the book team here, they do the plays, full on with real noise and swords and all the things. They do all the props. It's fantastic, but that might not be appropriate into a setting that you're going into where there are special needs. So again, it's about education, but it's about education through the school. So it's not me saying what they need to do. It's them going into the school and having a sit down with the head or the staff and working out what needs to be done and how they need to adapt what they're doing, or and that goes for anything we're going to do. But I don't think the church is bad at doing this sort of thing, but it's just that these places are very few and far between. And it's one of those things that if one is opened in a place, how do we get to be a part of that?
Yeah. So connected to that, still thinking about young people, I guess. How can the church? I mean, you've already said this is not really your specialty, so you may be like, "Shush, Susanna, stop asking me silly questions." But
it's making me think, which is good, because and thinking these are what I've got to brush up on. So,
okay. So how do you think the church can nurture and disciple young people with special educational needs, particularly those on the autism spectrum?
Again, it's about communication with parents, carers, and the people themselves, and it's finding out what works for them, and working out which services would be the best for them. So if you've got a church with a wide variety of services, like you've got a choral evensong, but then you've got a more informal sort of cafe church in the morning, which would be best? And don't always presume that it would be the cafe church. It could be the choral evensong. It just depends. So it's all about communication again, but it's also about having a different interaction maybe with that family, and maybe actually carrying on what was picked up in a service in their own home with them directly, so that if something is said or a sermon is preached, then maybe if it's possible to go to the house and unpack this further in a different way, so that people can see it for themselves. But it's about welcome. It's about being in the appropriate place, and it's about, again, good communication and not presuming to know what is needed.
That's great. So moving now slightly into, I guess, the more theology side of the questions we've been given. First of all, how do you read stories in the Gospels where Jesus heals people with various illnesses and disabilities? Obviously, he does that quite a lot, and I know some disabled people have quite a complicated relationship with those stories. Yeah. What do they say to you personally?
I love these stories. I think they're fantastic. Even as somebody that's got two ongoing long-term disabling issues, to me they show the power of God to heal, to interact with us, which is another thing, and to love us. And But these stories are not meant to mean everyone is healed in the way they expect. It's a bit like prayer in general, a bit like intercessory prayer. You know, we pray to God for X, Y, and Z, and then we wonder why it doesn't happen. But actually, it has happened. But God does it for the best, for the wider community, and for all other people that are connected to this issue, not just you. So it's not all about me. This is going to happen to me. A lot of healings are to show God's power in the world. In Jesus' stories, but some are there to show that communities can be healed and made whole again by God's interaction. If you think about the chap that had multiple demons and he was in chains, and he kept ripping the chains apart and attacking the people in the village, in the local community, then Jesus healing that demoniac, as they call it in the Bible, is actually is actually healing the whole community. So it's working on a wider basis than that. And also, if you look at some of the healings of the beggars, you have to think about, well, has Jesus just taken away their livelihood? Because begging was a profession. It still is, you know, you still have professional beggars. But in biblical times, people that lived around the temple begging, they made a living out of it. So has Jesus just taken their living away? It's an interesting one. I wouldn't want to get into that one too much. Or the Syrophoenician woman whose child is healed. But at the same time, what happens is we are reconciled with God. Everybody is reconciled with God through that. Because Jesus says, I've only come to heal the people of Israel. But actually by healing her daughter, everybody is brought into Christ's circle and the circle of God. And so that is a healing for everybody in that sense. So to me, they're stories about wholeness, reconciliation, community cohesion, social attitude. They're not just about individual healings. So that's the way I look at them. Look at the wider picture, the bigger picture of how this would impact on what is going on around.
So I guess taking that message into now our Christian lives today, is it ever appropriate to pray for someone's disability to go away?
I've agonised over this, not just over this question now, but I've agonised over this for a long time. And it's a very difficult issue, and I'm afraid it's a bit of sloping shoulders here, because it's something for one's own conscience. You know, do you feel you can pray for somebody with a disability? But I can speak from a personal experience. I've been made whole with my illness and my disabilities, and it's given me a whole new ministry. And it's given me a different attitude to life. It's put so many different people in my life who wouldn't have been there otherwise. But I'm not saying disability has afflicted me and isn't a pain in the backside, because it is. But it changes the way I've thought about the world, and it's also changed my relationship with God and with others to a more positive degree, which wouldn't have happened before. And what we've got to remember is, you know, disability is inevitable. Whether we like it, whether we think God's world's perfect or not, you know, that's a debate for another time. Disability is inevitable. So, and it can be used to help so many others. So that's one side of it. But also praying for someone's illness and disability has to be done with conversations with them. And I emphasize conversations. 1 5-minute conversation is not enough. It has to be long term. Because, you know, you have to think about where they are in what has happened to them. So the initial shock of somebody being told they have Parkinson's disease, MS, you know, or they've had an accident and they're not going to walk again, that is not the place to be thinking about, do I pray for this to go away? Because we are still in that initial shock. And yes, of course, our immediate reaction is, I don't want this. But, you know, this is why you need to take time and take those longer conversations. And then maybe a prayer for new life, new way of being, for wholeness, rather than for healing, for reconciliation with God and with self and with others, and prayer for God's help, and particularly God's help for those to see things clearer, in a wider life context. And I think that's where we mainly are. I think praying for people's disabilities just like that, no. But I think, once we know where we are and what is happening with the person, and yes, we can build up an idea of what we're going to pray about and what we're going to ask God for.
Thanks, that's a really helpful answer. So I just have a couple more questions then.
Yeah, no problem.
One is, is pastoral care in the context of disability something that is addressed in training for priests or other licensed ministers? And should it be?
To be honest, I don't know what he's done now. I mean, I trained 20 years ago, and pastoral care was taught in the sense of the theology of pastoral care, but not the sort of practical sense about it. I mean, I was a nurse and a midwife for many years, so I had an idea about care in general, but linking that to church and pastoral care was a whole new sort of level for me. And to be honest, I sort of had to bumble along and pick that up as a curate myself. But I don't know what is taught now. I would hope it had moved on. And that is something that actually, it's a good question, and it's something that I need to get in touch with Bible College and ordination colleges to see exactly what they do. So I think that's made me think about that particularly. I think it's essential that any pastoral care training includes the context of disability. I do the pastoral care training for the School of Ministry here at Hereford, and I know we bring in disabilities into that because obviously it's something that I would bring in anyway. But the thing I wouldn't want to see is that it's like a little bolt-on, lesson number 6, disability, after we've done the other 5 on everything else. What I'd like to see is all 6 lessons interspersed with, abilities, disabilities, and different ways of access and different ways of being and different ways that people will see God. As in the question we've talked about just before, praying with people. It is different in a pastoral context, particularly when dealing with long-term disabilities and illnesses, than it is praying for somebody because you've just popped around and had a cup of tea and, you're doing a normal sort of pastoral visit and just saying hello. So, yeah, I should hope that it is threaded through the whole of any course that is done on pastoral care. But I will actually investigate what is being done in colleges now, because that's made me think, because it wasn't done when I was there long time ago.
That is great. So someone I know of is now, I think he's a wheelchair user and is now ordained, but spent a long time just not thinking about it because as far as she was concerned, there were she saw no priests with disabilities, and so wasn't convinced that it was possible, just assumed you couldn't. What can the church do to encourage more vocations among disabled people?
I think the one thing that would help is the general change in attitude towards disabled people anyway. So if we do things like the fixes that we've talked about and the communication that I would like people to do, and the lack of presumption that is out there, then I think if we can show that, then I think that shows in a wider context, and people will think, I want to be a part of that. There's some people feel called to work to change attitudes, and that is a strong part of their calling. So some people will come into the church to change the church. That is what they are called to do. But others feel called to do God's work in other ways, as we know: mission, evangelism, growing disciples, pastoral care. Heavens forbid, some people even want to be just parish priests. But somebody who feels called to that and then is not welcome in a place that they are in, it's not going to do much for their vocation. So I think the church needs to accept a wider responsibility for a whole attitude change. and also not to expect disabled people to be the only campaigners on their behalf.
Yeah.
You know, it's quite easy. A lot of people get into sort of campaigning for disability. I'm going off track a little bit here. Campaigning for disability, and I must admit I'm the same when you are afflicted yourself with something such as Parkinson's disease, MS or something like that. You know, I'm a member of Parkinson's UK, I run the local Parkinson's support group, I do a lot of work for Parkinson's UK and do research for them, you know, part of the medical trials, etc. I didn't do it before.
Yeah.
Because it didn't affect me before. So again, I think it's getting that word out to a wider people to start thinking about these things before they actually become an issue for people themselves. And I think if the church does that, and the church looks towards a change towards disability and how people are welcomed into church and equality for all, then I think, you know, automatically vocations would increase because people will feel welcome in every sphere of the life of the church.
Yeah, that's really good. So yeah, I think we've come to the end of the questions that I've got listed. So sort of where could if people, you know, bouncing off the idea of, you know, getting involved in campaigning and being interested even when you're not disabled or not yet disabled, where could people go to learn more about things that we've talked about today?
Well, they can contact me direct. I'm quite happy for people to contact me direct, obviously. The C of E has a disability section on its website because there is a national disability advisors team. Most dioceses do that. I've just plugged into that, so I've become a part of that now. And then there are a couple of organisations that I have sort of looked at and used in the past. And what I'll do is, if I send you the links, they can be put at the bottom of... you know, in the comments section or whatever. And one is Disability and Jesus. And then there is a group called Through the Roof and another one called Churches for All. And they have lots of information and testimonies of people of what they do and activities that they have and activities that you can introduce, and there's a lot of good information through those websites. So we'll put them at the bottom and people can access them there. But by all means, please do contact me directly. Again, we can put my details at the bottom and we can have a conversation, and when all this is over I can even come and see you in your context. And what you're doing, and you know how we can enhance that for you.
That's brilliant. Do you have any other thoughts or things that you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Just that I really want to emphasise that yes, I am here. Don't think if it's too small a question or if it's a silly question or anything like that, don't think on those lines. Just get in touch with me. I'd rather you get in touch with me and we have the conversation and we work it out, rather than you think, oh, it's a silly question and I don't want to do that because I'm going to look stupid. Because you're not going to look stupid. It's only going to be between me and you. I'm not going to go about saying, oh, so and so asked this blooming stupid question the other day. Yeah, it's between me and you. We'll have a conversation about it, and I'd rather put people's minds at ease and maybe make life a little bit better for everybody than people just sit on their questions because they don't think they're relevant or they are, you know, they think they're silly. Nothing is a silly question.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for all of your great wisdom and thoughts on all of those
thank you.
questions. It's been really fab.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it, and like I say, I hope this helps us to interact with more people and to move the diocese forward on all aspects of disability, ability, and people interacting together.
I hope so too. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You.